Hi everyone, Jill here, and welcome to Whispering Willow Farm, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to talk to you all about choosing the right varieties for your farms, gardens, and homesteads. So a little bit about me, if you do not know me already. Like I said, I'm Jill Reagan. My husband Nathan and I farm a little over 4 acres in central Arkansas with our beautiful daughters, but less than an acre of our property is designated for food and flower production for our families and to sell because we live on a really rocky terrain. And because we have some of these challenges of just not being able to utilize a lot of our space for growing, we've had to really start implementing different systems. We had to learn to farm intensively on a small scale. And because of this, we've really found a sweet spot for our farm just for intensive small scale growing. And we know if we can do this, you can too. I talk to so many people, and the general census is lack of access to land and lack of just financial ability to buy land. And so since we know that we struggle with some of these issues, many of you guys are probably struggling with some of these issues, we really want to highlight that small scale farmer, and we really want to show people that you don't need a lot of land to grow food or flowers really efficiently, whether that is for your family, selling, or maybe you decide to do both. And so I really dive into all the details in my book, The Tiny But Mighty Farm. And so if you're interested in that, I'm going to put a link down below. But today we're going to talk all about choosing the right varieties for your small farm, why it's crucial, how it's going to be beneficial, and what we're doing as well. So I do want to start this video with saying, if you're a backyard gardener, a homesteader, aspiring farmer or gardener, this video is for you, but I do want you to have an open mind. So I grew up learning to garden from my papa Kenneth, and he had such a huge influence in my life, but my papa only grew heirlooms. And he only tilled his garden, and I remember for many years thinking that was the only way to do it. I remember thinking anything outside of an heirloom was just bananas, and it couldn't be right because that's not what my papa did. And then I learned as I started deepening my knowledge that, you know, hybrids really aren't a bad thing, and maybe there is a place for a hybrid on our farm. Now we're primarily growing hybrids. And so a quick overview, if maybe you are that aspiring gardener who's just getting started, I'm going to talk through the difference real quick of what an heirloom and a hybrid is. So an heirloom is a seed that's been passed down from generations to generations. They're open pollinated. Many of us are growing heirlooms for their unique flavor, for their unique traits, and the story that they tell. And while we do largely focus on hybrids on our farm, you will always see my cottage garden filled with heirlooms. You'll see them sprinkled here and there because they do offer so much value. One, they do tell a significant story. It is the way my papa did it, and that's how I kind of honor him, by planting stuff that he grew in his garden and my garden. And if you're just growing for a culinary aspect, for a flavor aspect, I think heirlooms is a really great way to go about doing that. But if you are wanting to max out production, you're wanting to grow the most in a small amount, whether that's to, you know, provide food for your family year round. Maybe you've got goals of, you know, lessening that grocery bill. Maybe you have goals of just being less reliant on the grocery store, period, then I do think, you know, considering some different options is going to be pretty beneficial to you. So like I mentioned, an heirloom's been passed down from generation to generation. They're open pollinated. They come in lots of beautiful shapes, colors. They've got these unique qualities and traits about them, and the flavor is absolutely unbeatable. And then we have the hybrid. And what a hybrid is it is the offspring of a cross between two parent plants. And these are bred specifically to be disease and pest resistant, to produce high yields, and to grow well in various climates. And like I mentioned, we're on a rocky terrain, and we have some challenges here on our farm. And so I have actually used these bred traits to my advantage to make sure that I max out yield on a small space. Like I mentioned, I love heirlooms. I will always find a place in my garden and on my farm for heirloom, but the vast majority of what we're doing and we are growing are hybrid varieties because we can implement some pruning and trellising techniques and really just double our yields. And so I want to give you guys an example. I've been showing a lot of content on how we are trellising our tomatoes, our cucumbers, how we're pruning our tomatoes in the greenhouse. And so I'm going to use this as an example. So with our tomatoes, we are growing a hybrid variety. We are hard pruning them in our greenhouse, meaning we are just pruning the tops off. And instead of that tomato plant creating one singular main leader of that plant, it is now going to create two side shoots, which will be the two main fruit producing leaders of the plant. This yields me a lot of fruit per plant. In fact, I have done comparisons. It yields me double the amount. Now I do have to trellis a little bit different. I have to think about pruning in the greenhouse, but one plant, I have now doubled its production just by choosing the right varieties and then, you know, pruning and trellising appropriately. That's huge. If you're really limited on space, maybe you have a quarter of an acre in your backyard, maybe you just have room for one raised bed. If you could grow 4 tomato plants, that is actually going to produce the amount of 8 tomato plants in a smaller bed, you're getting more yield per bed space. And if we're limited on space, you guys, that's a really big deal. And so the varieties that we are growing on our farm are the Sakura tomatoes. They're beautiful little cherry tomatoes. We are growing the Rebelskis, which are large slicers. We're growing the Abigail, which is a large slicer. We've got the Lemon Boy Plus, which is a beautiful yellow. We are growing a golden grape. We are growing, you know, a lot of different varieties. And so I don't want you to think that you're limited by going with a hybrid, because I told you we've got yellows, we've got reds, we've got, you know, these pinks and all these different varieties. So while you won't have as many options as choosing an heirloom, if you do go the hybrid route, there still are options that can add some diversity and color and flavors, which is what we do. We figure out what are those best slicers that are going to produce the most, what's the best cherry tomato that's going to do really well, and we hone in on those things and we add all the other techniques, and it works really well in our favor. Another reason why choosing the right varieties are so crucial is because if you're anything like me, I want the lowest amount of inputs with the highest amount of outputs available. It's this whole idea of working smarter, not harder. Now, if you live on a farm or you're dreaming of living on a farm, don't get me wrong, it's always hard work, but I want to use my time wisely. I don't want to spend all my time on a tedious task that could not even, you know, have been necessary had I just chose a different variety to begin with. So I think it's really important to know your goals before you start figuring out, you know, what varieties you want to grow on your farms or in your gardens. And so for me, when you're looking through that seed catalog and your goal for your family is to can enough tomatoes to last you through winter, maybe, you know, buying one of those heirloom varieties that is primarily grown for flavor, you're gonna sacrifice some of the yield because of that. And if your goal is just to can enough diced tomatoes so you don't have to go to the store and buy diced tomatoes, you're probably going to lean, you know, on the side of an heirloom, because you know you're going to have less pests and disease. You know it's going to withstand some of the different elements, whether that's fluctuating highs and lows. Maybe you deal with a lot of humidity and heat where you are. It's just, you know, bred to kind of withstand those things better, and so it is going to produce more. But maybe you're flipping through that seed catalog and you're thinking, I just really want to make beautiful food that my family enjoys that was cultivated right in my backyard. And I'm going to say an heirloom is probably that variety you want to go for. You're not really worried about making sure you're putting up the harvest. You just want to be able to harvest to cook fresh in your kitchen. There's value in that all day long. But if you don't know your why, you're really going to get confused when it comes time to planting your seeds and building out your gardens for the year. Even just by choosing a variety that is disease resistant is crucial depending on the climate that you're living in. And so for me, we do deal with a lot of hot summers and a lot of humidity, and so knowing that I'm growing a variety that is resistant to that anyways, I'm not having to constantly manage the health of my plant, making sure that it's not getting blight or it's not getting powdery mildew or something like that and having to rip it up. I'm not having to worry about that, and my plant's just putting all of its energy and focus in producing fruit. And for me, this is crucial. The first year I decided to switch and primarily grow hybrids on my farm was the first year I never had aphids on my tomatoes. I never ripped out a tomato plant due to pest or disease, which was huge. And that might be huge to you as well. You might be gardening while you're still maintaining a full-time job, and if you're having to constantly spend all your free time dealing with the maintenance and the well-being of your plant, you might get burnt out. You might get discouraged. And so choosing those right varieties are just going to set you up for success in the long run. So when you choose those right varieties that fit your needs, your climates, and your goals, depending on what that is, you might be able to, in my case, I am able to grow fewer plants and produce more food per plant just because of the variety that I chose. Maybe you're short on bed space. You can start to incorporate interplanting. I talked about this on a previous vlog, but if you are trellising appropriately and you're pruning heavily, that way you have that good airflow, you're able to really just start planting things along some of your bigger variety as well, which again, you're taking a limited space and learning to maximize it. My main focus and shift and goal for this year is to teach backyard gardeners, homesteaders, and farmers professional techniques to yield abundance, to really kind of shift out of this mindset of being discouraged by what we don't have, but really learning to utilize what we have well. I've had to do this. I understand kind of the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into this. I felt discouraged before. And the way I really moved out of that mindset was to start looking at my space in a different way, to start choosing varieties that were going to cater to what I had instead of just keep providing disadvantages. Throughout the season, I will continue to talk about the varieties that I'm growing, but just kind of an overview for you. Maybe you are still rummaging through those seed catalogs. Most of our tomatoes are going to be hybrid varieties. We are growing one bed full of heirlooms to see how they do hard pruned the same way and trellis the same way as our hybrids, and really just put those bred traits to the test, right? I have had a lot of great success, but I know some of you guys might be on the fence. Maybe you're not willing to make that transition from an heirloom to a hybrid because you haven't seen the results that it yields. I get it. And so my goal this year is to really give you a clear representation of how this can benefit you and your farm. Like I mentioned, I'm not hating on the heirlooms. I absolutely love the heirlooms. You'll see me growing, green beans on a trellis. You will see all sorts of heirloom varieties sprinkled throughout my garden, but that's more for pleasure. That's more for kind of scratching that itch I have for culinary exploration, and how I do that is by growing those heirlooms that are packed full of flavor, harvesting them at their peak and using them immediately. So there's value in that as well, but choosing the right varieties for your farm, whether that's a hybrid or whether that's an heirloom, is going to be crucial to your success, because if you go into it blind, you will not be successful. I have been that gardener who planted without a plan, and it did not yield good results. I ended up having overcrowded plants with no airflow, with lots of pests and disease, and I spent a lot of labor time trying to maintain those plants because I didn't have the best setup for myself and for my garden. So I don't want you guys to make the same mistakes I do. I want you to choose your varieties well. I want you to understand pruning and trellising and why this makes a huge difference. I will continue to do these videos on information as far as how do we prune our cucumbers, how do we prune our tomatoes, how do we prune our peppers, how are we trellising these things to really utilize our small space well. So I hope that as you guys are getting ready to plant out your gardens, you will be mindful of the varieties that you're choosing, and that you might add a few new ones into your rotation as well. So I hope this was helpful. I hope you guys are choosing the right varieties to best suit your farms, gardens, and homesteads this year, and I'll talk to you guys soon.